Hey everyone, I just wanted to review a skill that's so important because you're going to use it all the time whenever you hear the word fractions, right? When we're talking about our lowest terms, that's also a synonym for our simplify or reduce. And basically, all we're trying to do is an equivalent fraction in the smallest version of the fraction. Where remember before we've talked about scaling up, this time we're going to scale down. So in each case, in order for us to make it lowest terms, number one, you have to know the greatest common factor. And you also have to know that each time we're going to take our original fraction and we're going to be dividing by the same number on top as the same number on the bottom. So our first thing that we're always going to do is we're going to look for a common factor. So obviously we can use our chart that we've given, but if we're in a place where we don't know, we don't have a chart, we don't know what it is, what we're going to do is take a look at our ones place, because I notice that there's an 8 in each of these. And I know, because I know my facts, and if I'm looking at my chart, I know 58 is not a multiple of 8. So I cannot divide the top and the bottom by 8, because on this one, I would get 8 divided by 8 would be 1. But 58 divided by 8 would give me a whole number and a decimal, right? Because I'd have a part of another one or a fraction, a whole number and a fraction. And I can't do that because I need whole numbers when I'm looking at that. So the one thing that I do know is 8 and 58, because 58 has an 8 in the ones place, are both even numbers, which tells me 2 is a factor. So when I divide my top and my bottom by 2, I'm going to end up with 4 over 29, because I did 8 divided by 2 is 4, and 58 divided by 2 is 29. I want to show you, for those of you who are not sure what you should be doing, because remember, when we do these work, I don't want you to use a calculator. So on this one, what I did is I put that under the bar, and there's my 2. Remember, I do divide, multiply, subtract, bring down. So I'm looking at my 5, and I'm splitting that into groups of 2. I have 2 groups. 2 times 2 is 4. When I subtract, I get 1. And we always know whatever we get here needs to be smaller than out here, because this is how many are in a group. So if I have a number down here that's bigger than this, that tells me I can make more groups. Remember, up here on the top is telling me how many groups I have. 2 times 9 gives me 18. So that's where I get my 29. When I move over here to 14 over 30, well, I know 14 is not a factor of 30, or I can say the other way, 30 is not a multiple of 14. But once again, I have 2 even numbers. So I'm going to divide the top and the bottom by 2. When I divide my top and my bottom by 2, I get 7 over 15. So I'm going to tell you a little secret about 30. When I see 30, I think about a clock. And obviously my big hand's on the 6. If I split that into 2 groups, then I'm going to end up kind of like on that 3 on the clock. So I end up with 15 minutes. So that's my fastest way that I can do that. I can always do my long division problem. But remember, I told you, I kind of like to do it the quickest way and like the easiest. So that's for me what it is, but you'll have your method too. When I look here at the next one, I have 10 over 16. Hopefully we figured out by now, if I have a 0 and a 6 in the ones, that's going to be even. So 2 is going to be my factor again. So I should end up with 5 over 8. Okay, so you're probably thinking these are like really easy. And you're right. Most of these are in the same thing. We use the same procedure for each one. Okay, our next one's a little bit different. When you see 14 over 14, they are both even. But why would I start with 2 over 2 if I see that I have the same number on top and the same number on the bottom? I know that I can divide the top. I know that I can divide the top and the bottom by 14, and I end up with 1 over 1. Now also remember, if you see the same number on the top and the same number on the bottom, you don't really have to do this, because you should know right away that this is 1, right? Because if my fraction was divided, it had 14 pieces in my whole, and I had 14, I have the whole thing. Okay, let's take a look at the next one. This one's a little bit different because I have 18 over 21. I know right away when I look at it, right, I'm pretty close to a whole because there's 21 pieces in the whole, and I have 18 of them. But I also notice that 8 is an even number. 21 is not an even number because I have my 1 here. 21 is an odd number. So I can't divide by 2, but I can try because I know that 3 is a factor of 18. So let's try 3. So when I divide my top and my bottom by 3, I end up with 6, and over here is 7. And if you're checking and you're not sure, right, we can always go backwards the other way because we call that the inverse, right? 6 times 3 gives me 18. 7 times 3 gives me 21. 6 and 7 is going to be the simplest because 6 is an even number and 7 is a prime number. Remember? And the same thing up here. 7 is a prime number. 15 is an that is an odd number. Oh, Mrs. Marshall, what do you say? So when I have a prime number, I know that's the lowest terms for that one. And if that number is not a factor for the other, that's my lowest terms. The next one I have 5 and 60. Well, you know what? Every time I see 5, I think of a clock. Because when I think of a clock, that helps me also to know 60 is a multiple of 5. Think about that. There's 60 minutes in an hour. So if I have 60 minutes, I want you to stop and think, what number is my big hand on? Because that's my minute hand. If you said 12, you're correct. If you're thinking, Mrs. Marshall, you're crazy thinking about a clock and you just want to skip count by 5s, then go for it. You'll end up with 12 groups of 5, or you'll have counted 5, like you'll have, if you're counting by 5, you'll have lifted like 12 fingers as you were skip counting. You'll end up with 60. Okay, our next one is 16 over 38. Notice we have even numbers in my ones place again. So I'm going to divide each of them by 2. So when I do that, I divide it by 2 over 2, and 16 divided by 2 is 8, which is one of our easier ones. But if you're not sure with 38 when you divide by 2, I did the division for you, right? So if I have my 3, I always start on the left. I have 3 things, and I split it into groups of 2. I get 1 group. 2 times 1 is 2. I subtract, I get my 1. Now I bring down my 8. And if I have 18 items, and I'm making groups of 2, I make 9 groups. 2 times 9 gives me 18. So I have 0 left. So my final answer here is 8 over 19. 19 is a prime number. So I know that that's the lowest it can go. And I cannot do 8 times anything to equal 19. So that's going to be my simplest form right here. Okay, so 4 over 52 is a little bit different. Okay, so I'm going to show you 2 ways for this one. Because I know as well that there's 52 cards in a deck. This is my thinking, right, for all my different ways if I don't know my facts. I know there's 52 cards in a deck, and I know there's 4 different suits, right? Those are your what the shapes that are on the cards, right? Your hearts and your diamonds, your spades and your clubs. So I know if that 4 is going to be a factor of this, because I can split it evenly because each suit has the same amount. So when I divide this 4 over 4, I end up with 1 over 13. Or, this is what I was saying, this is where it's nothing wrong with it. If you recognize, and hopefully you did, right? A 4 and a 2 in the ones place means this is an even number. So I can start with this, and this is what I was talking about. I can divide by 2 over 2. And when I divide by 2 over 2, I get 2 over 26. But this is where it comes into play, right? I have a 2 and I have a 6. So these are both even numbers, which means this is not lowest terms yet. So I have to divide again. And when I divide again by 2 over 2, because remember they're even, and that's what I was going for, I end up with 1 over 13, which is the same as up here. But notice, I had this step and this step that was the same as here, right? Because 2 plus 2 is 4. So either way will work. And that's such a good thing, guys, because you can't always use a calculator. You can't always have a chart with you, right? So that's going to help. So on the next one, this one, we have our 15 over 30. Well, we're going to use our clock thing, which is the same as when I was talking about up here that I used. So I know 15 minutes and 30 minutes. That tells me right away that 15 is a factor of 30. Or you can say it the other way, 30 is a multiple of 15. So if I'm thinking of my clock, I'm going to show you guys a visual what I'm talking about. So here's my clock, right? And I split it into 4 equal pieces because that's how many 15-minute increments are in there. So when I get to 30, look, I had 1, 2 15-minute increments. So when I do this, I did 15 divided by 15 gives me 1, and 30 divided by 15 gives me 1/2. So there's where it is, right? Because if I go here to 15, I had 1 set. If I'm at 30 minutes, I had 2 groups of 15. So that's where we are. I hope you did well, and let me know if you need more help.